Does anybody else feel like trying to fly after they hear that? Is it just me? Apparently it's just me. Okay. Well, maybe I'm just weird. I don't know. Just pumps me up. But last week we started the series. Eric started us off. The series called Heroes, which kind of leads us to ask the question, what is a hero? And in today's society, in today's culture, we think of things like, Iron Man and the Hulk and Wonder Woman and all of those amazing people who are superheroes. And it kind of leads us to realize and to think that hero status is something that's unattainable for us. Because it's like, I'm not a billionaire. I can't invest in all this technology to go and save the world from crazy robots or aliens or something like that. Like, I can't be the one to step up and do that. Because a hero is there's someone who saves the world. There's someone who saves the entire universe, or at the very least, they save someone's day. And a lot of times we think if a hero is someone who saves someone's day, I can't really do that. I mean, someone has called me a hero before and said that I saved the day because I brought my key to the Life Center to let them in. And I was like, yeah, that's right. Look at me, I got keys. Yeah, but like that's the kind of hero status that we can kind of get. The real hero, like I don't know if that can actually happen. But like when Shareya and we were at Frontier School of the Bible in LaGrange, Wyoming. One day I was sitting in class and the dean of students walked in. And he goes, okay, so the entire school is on lockdown because a prisoner broke out of Cheyenne and they stole a car. They were in a car chase that went over 50 miles. They wrecked the car about 1 mile outside of LaGrange and they ran into the town. And there is someone who is loose in LaGrange and there's like a manhunt going on. And so we are on lockdown. And then he just walks out. And the professor is like, well, let's just get back to what it is we were talking about. And I mean, every single guy there was gone because every single one of us was like, I want to be the one to get that guy. I want to be the one who's going to go find this guy and like sneak up on him and like pounce on him and then hold him there until the police come. And like, I want to be the hero. I want to be the guy who saves the day. And like there were even some guys that went so far as to break the lockdown and go driving around town. I was not one of them. Making sure you hear that, Shareya. Yeah, if I would have been one of them, I probably wouldn't be married. Shareya would have deemed me too reckless. And so I was not one of those guys, but they were like driving around town trying to find this guy. And seriously, every single one of us, we were like, I want to be the one to save the day. I want to be the one to be the hero, to be the one who finds this guy, to be the one who holds him there until the police come, to be the one who gets the extra punch in the face, like, and that's for justice or something like that. I don't know. I guess that's my catchphrase. I don't know. We'll say something like that. But the idea of there has to be a certain scenario and some crazy act of courage in order to become a hero, that just kind of makes the thought of being a hero sort of inaccessible to so many of us. Because what are the chances of something like that happening and us being the one to run in and save the day? Like, that just seems like it's so far-fetched. It's like a 1 in a billion chance that would happen to us. It's just not going to happen. And so the idea of being a hero is just sort of inaccessible until Jesus stepped onto the scene. And why did Jesus make being a hero accessible? Well, Jesus, he came along and with one simple question, he not only made being a hero accessible, he also took away all of our excuse to not be a hero. And this is something, even if you're not a Jesus follower, if you're here and you're like, I'm not into this whole church thing or anything like that, even if that's you, this is still something that can be applied to you. And so today, I want to go through the story and explain and get into this extraordinary question that Jesus asked. Because this question, for every single one of us, regardless of age, religion, beliefs, race, gender, any of that, whatever you've experienced in life, this one question is the start for us to have the opportunity to save the world. And so it picks up in Luke chapter 10. It says, one day an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus. And he's thinking like, oh, I want to embarrass Jesus. After all, I'm the expert of the law. I want to be the one to embarrass him. That was usually the goal of people who wanted to ask Jesus questions. And so being a master of the law, he wanted to ask Jesus a question about the law. So he asked Jesus, he says, "Teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Which is a good question, but Jesus, being Jesus, he knew that that wasn't the real question. That wasn't really why this guy was there. He knew that there was a question behind the question kind of thing. And so Jesus answers his question in the most Jesus way possible with another question. And he says, "What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?" In other words, you're the expert of the law. Why don't you tell me what it says? How do you read it? And the expert of the law, which this is pretty good. He actually quotes a passage from the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures that every single Jewish boy and girl memorized growing up. Everyone who was in the audience had this memorized, probably had it memorized because this was the answer to the question, what does God want most? How do you get in good with God? What is the greatest commandment? And everybody knew the answer. So Jesus said, "How do you read it?" And the man answered, and while the man was answering, the crowd was kind of moving their mouths along because they all knew it and they knew this was the answer. The man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind." Now pause right there. That was the correct answer. Okay, that was the correct answer. A little bit earlier on, someone had asked Jesus the same question. They just asked it in a slightly different way. They said, "What is the greatest commandment?" In other words, what makes God happy? What's God's top priority? And Jesus answered the question like everyone else in the audience would. But as most people today know, Jesus added an extra little line at the end of it. Does anybody know what it is? And love your neighbor as yourself. See, now we don't get this because we live in the 21st century. We have the whole scripture. But when Jesus added a second verse to what these people grew up being taught, he was messing with tradition. I mean, he's messing with what they learned while they were growing up. And right here, this signaled a huge shift because it all of a sudden went from love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. So it's just me and God to now I got to love my neighbor as myself. So it goes from a vertical interaction with God to all of a sudden a horizontal relationship with God. And now, what Jesus added, it actually comes from the Jewish scriptures in the book of Leviticus. But what's significant is that in this verse, the author, he actually defines neighbor and what it means. So the man asked Jesus the question, and Jesus said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself." And they're like, "Whoa, okay, wait a second, Jesus. Where did that last part come from? Like, what do you mean?" And Jesus takes them back to the Jewish scriptures. It says in Leviticus 19:18, "Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against your people." So it's kind of like in a very ethnic, nationalistic kind of way, like these are my people. This is my group of people. And when it comes to how you treat your people, make sure you don't bear a grudge with anyone who is your people. And then the author, he kind of repeats this idea by saying like, love your people as yourself. But he doesn't say love your people as yourself. He changes the word. He says love your neighbor as yourself, because the author wanted to make sure everybody knew what a neighbor was. And do you know what a neighbor was to the people who took the Jewish scriptures literally? A neighbor to a Jewish person was other Jews. It was my fellow Jewish brothers and sisters, and that's something that every single person who was in that audience knew and they understood. If you asked someone on the streets of Jerusalem or Galilee and you said, "Who is your neighbor?" they would say, "My fellow Jewish brothers and sisters." Like they would say, "My neighbor is fellow Jews." So that right there was the context. That was the understanding that this group of people had and that everyone had leading into this story. So now back to the story. The master of the law, he was apparently there when Jesus added this next line saying, "Love your neighbor as yourself." And when he added that, he kind of walked away thinking, aha, I think I found a way to trip Jesus up. Like, I think I have this figured out. So he asked Jesus, "What must I do to be saved?" Jesus responds, "How do you read it?" And the man says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, all your mind." And then I think he probably just like kind of smirked right there because he's like, "And you have to love your neighbor as yourself." See, I know the answer. He quoted Jesus to Jesus is what he did. And he gave the right answer, but he's up to something here. Like you can still kind of sense there's something else going on here. And Jesus says, "You're right. Do this and you will live." Jesus is like, "Great job. You got the answer correct. You know that in order to please God, it's not just focusing on loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You have to love your neighbor as yourself to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength." And he's like, "Great job. You did awesome." And Jesus turns to leave. And then the scripture actually says, the man wanted to justify his actions. See, he's not done. He's like, that wasn't my real question. That was kind of like the setup. Now for the one that I am going to trip you up with. He says, "And who is my neighbor?" So this man is like, okay, Jesus, you can't just say, "Love your neighbor as yourself." That is way, way too broad. That is too broad. In other words, and here's the real question that he was asking. What is the minimum amount of neighbor loving required in order to get God's favor? And for him, it was even more narrow than that. It was, what is the minimum amount of Jewish neighbor loving required to make God happy? Now, of course, Jesus, being Jesus, he saw right through this. He knew where this guy was going. So Jesus, he didn't answer his question. He answered the question the guy should have been asking. Because the real question that we're going to see and what we're going to talk about today, it's not who is my neighbor. It's not a who question at all. It's actually a what question. And the question is, what does neighbor love look like? If my responsibility is to love my neighbor as myself, Jesus, give me some tips, give me some practical tips so that way I can actually do that. But this guy, he doesn't just want practical tips. He wants the minimum requirement. He wants what so many of us want. And do you know what he really wanted? And this is what this guy actually wanted. How close can I get to sin without actually sinning? How can I make sure I give God what God wants, but not miss out on what I want? And many of us have asked this question before. I mean, I get this question from students all the time when they're in a relationship. They say, how physical is too physical before it becomes sin? They're saying, like, where's the line where this turns into sin, and how close can I get to that line before I cross it? And so, like, because I can see some of you guys are like, how is that the question? He's saying, where is the line that I need to love someone, love my neighbor this much to please God without having to love everybody else? I mean, I'll just love my neighbor right here, but not really love everybody else. And here's the thing. Whenever we ask that question, whenever that question was asked in the Bible, how close to sin can I get without sinning, the Bible just goes silent. It doesn't actually give that answer. But why? I mean, that's the question everybody else wants to know. But Jesus, he doesn't want to answer that question because he doesn't want to give us a minimum requirement. Jesus wants us to aspire to greatness. So you're saying, who do I love? Who do I not love? Jesus, can you kind of fill this in? The question the man asked, and who is my neighbor? It's just kind of sitting out there, and there's this tension and silence as everybody's just waiting and anticipating what Jesus is going to say. And so Jesus goes into one of the most well-known parables out there to answer this guy's question. Jesus replied with a story. He says, a Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. And of course, they stripped him of his clothes, because at that time, clothes were valuable. And so they stripped him of his clothes, they beat him up, and they went on their way, leaving him half dead. Now pause for a second. Show of hands, and I really want you to raise your hands, even if you're at home in your living room, you're going to feel weird, but raise your hands. How many of you have heard the story of the Good Samaritan before today? Yeah, that's a lot of people. Now, did you know that you can go to almost any audience in the world, regardless of where you're at, regardless of what language they speak, you could ask that question, and most people would raise their hand? Now, think about how phenomenal that is. We use this terminology all the time. We say things like, oh, they were such a good Samaritan. He was such a good Samaritan, or she was a good Samaritan. I mean, maybe you've used that phrase and you didn't even know you were quoting Jesus at the time. But this is a story that was introduced by Jesus over 2,000 years ago that still has an impact in our culture and society today. In fact, this story impacts you and me, as we're going to find out later on. That when we get to the question that Jesus kind of lands the plane with, that just causes everyone to go crazy. And here's the thing, this right here, this is why you should follow Jesus. Because this idea, what Jesus calls these people to do, what Jesus calls us to do, what he calls you and I to do, it's not common. It's not average. It's not natural. It wasn't even the Jewish thing to do back then. Nobody did what he's about to ask us to do, and we're still talking about it today. See, you should follow Jesus because following Jesus will make you better at life, and it will make your life better. And here's what I mean by that. If everyone in the world, if everyone in our community, even if everyone just in this building right now would take this one teaching of Jesus seriously, it would change so much. See, you knew the story before you even came in here. And so you know. But we're gonna talk about it. But back to the story. So Jesus tells this story, and he says, a man was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. He gets beat up, stripped, left for dead. And then he continues with the story. He says, by chance, a priest came along. But when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed to the other side of the road. Now, if the answer of you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength is true by loving your neighbor as yourself, if that's true, then these two religious leaders, they were doomed because they didn't love their Jewish neighbor as they loved themselves. And everyone in Jesus' crowd, they got that. They understood the implications of that. But Jesus wasn't done. Jesus wasn't done. Jesus then says, then a despised Samaritan came along. Now, if you grew up in church, you know that Jews and Samaritans, they don't get along. It's kind of like, if any of you guys know the story, The Outsiders, the Greasers and the Jets, anything like that. Nobody gets that. Wow, I was homeschooled. Oh my goodness. Okay, there's what, hey, when you're a jet all the way from your first cigarette to your last dying day. That's right. That's the only thing that I remember. You want to know how homeschooled I was. My friends and I would walk through our school snapping our fingers because that's what the Jets did. Yep, we thought we were cool. Anyways, but that's what it was with Jews and Samaritans. That's what it was. They hated each other. They did not do anything together. They did not intermix. They didn't marry. They didn't be with each other. They didn't touch each other, nothing. They despised each other. Jews and Samaritans, they did not. Essentially, it was like taught racism because, oh, they're the Jews, or oh, they're the Samaritans. Like we don't mix with them. They don't mix, they don't like each other, whatever it is. And at this point, the man who asked Jesus this question, who was trying to trick Jesus, he probably just smiled and he's like, oh yes, Jesus, if you make the Samaritan the good guy, oh, you're in for it. Because this is a mostly Jewish audience. And so if you make the Samaritan the good guy, I mean, everyone here is going to be in an uproar and like, this is great, this is perfect. And in fact, it's even safe to assume that many of the people that were in the audience there at the time probably assumed that the robber in the first place was a Samaritan. Because that's how they looked at them, that's how they treated them, that's how much they looked down on Samaritans. Now, nothing to do with the story or anything, but isn't it true that for many of us, when we hear about certain types of crime, certain types of people come to our mind? I mean, if that's true for you, you got to do some wrestling with God about that. But that is the picture of what was happening in that society. Jews, Samaritans did not get along whatsoever. And so now Jesus continues. He says, a despised Samaritan came along, and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. And then, as if compassion on him wasn't enough, Jesus makes the Samaritan go the extra mile, like going from just a good guy to all of a sudden hero status. It says, going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine. So he took his own prized possessions and used them on this man. He bandaged them so a Jewish or a Samaritan touched a Jewish man and helped clean his wounds. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. So for the rest of the trip, this guy who he didn't even really like, or these people didn't get along, he was riding on the Samaritan's donkey, and the Samaritan was having to walk the rest of that way along the side of the donkey. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, but he put him on his own donkey, so he had to drive or walk the rest of the way. And then Jesus doesn't just stop there. Jesus keeps on going. He says, the next day, and they're like, whoa. The next day, you're trying to tell me that a Samaritan found a Jewish person and stayed the night with him to nurse his wounds? I mean, it's one thing to just get him to a place where he can get help, but to be there, be the one who stays the night with him, to take care of him and make sure that he's okay. I mean, that is a lot. Like this took the Samaritan from hero status to superhero status. But he goes on, he says, the next day, he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins and told him, take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you when I come back. In other words, I'm coming back to check on this guy. And this was just over the top. And everyone in the audience was in uproar because they're like, the Samaritan was the hero to the Jewish man? Like, I mean, he's a Samaritan. Are you kidding me? We don't like them. We don't like Samaritans. They don't get along with us. Like, what in the world, Jesus? Why are you painting this Samaritan in such a good light? And once everyone kind of settled down, Jesus did something so amazing. You know what Jesus did next? He redefined neighbor for everybody and every nation and every generation from that point on. From this point on, no one would have the freedom to define neighbor in terms of location, in terms of genealogy or race. No one would have the freedom or the right to limit their definition of neighbor to those who were just like themselves. And Jesus, he did this with one perfect question. And this question it's one that forces us to examine our own hearts, to examine our prejudices. And Jesus' audience, they're kind of leaning in and they're waiting because they're like, okay, we were talking about neighbors, and then Jesus tells us the story, and like, how is this all going to connect? And Jesus kind of just lets the silence, the anticipation, the tension just build a little bit. And then he asks the question, which of these 3 would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by the robbers? I mean, that's not a difficult question, which is what made it so convicting to Jesus' audience. But we miss this because we weren't there, we're not Jewish and in that time period. But let me give you the question that Jesus was really asking here to the audience and to the group of people who did not like Samaritans whatsoever. Which of these loved the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength by loving a stranger as themselves? That was the question that Jesus asked. Which of these treated a stranger like a neighbor? Which of these was the hero? And the crowd was just kind of quiet, and the expert of the law who came to trap Jesus is just standing there like, why did I ask this stupid question in the first place? And everyone else is seated, and it's just he and Jesus, and now he's on the spot, and he knows the answer to the question. But he also knows that if he says it out loud, he then becomes accountable to it. Parents, you do this all the time with kids when they're getting ready to like go out the door and they're like, hey, what time do I have to be back? And you're like, 10:30. You got to be back at 10:30. Then they start running. You're like, wait. Say it back to me. And they're like, I need to be back at 10:30. That's my teenage girl impersonation right there. But I need to be back at 10:30. And you know, when they say it out loud, they then become accountable to it because they can't say, oh, I didn't know. They said it out loud so they know the answer. And it's the same type of thing. And the man replied, the one who showed him mercy. He couldn't even bring himself to say the Samaritan. That's how much he despised Samaritans. He couldn't even bring himself to say that. And Jesus says this, and this is perfect. Yes. Now go and do the same. Do you know what Jesus said to this Jewish man and to this Jewish crowd? He said, be the Samaritan. And Jesus, here's the thing. With that statement, neighbor love would never mean the same thing again. And Jesus, he didn't just say this, he did it. Very soon after this took place, Jesus would become a neighbor to everyone of every generation for all time, and he would demonstrate his own love for you and for me. Even though we lived in opposition of him, Romans 5:8 says that God demonstrates his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. While we lived in opposition of him, even though many would hate him and would deny his existence, Jesus would still show what neighborly love looked like, and it cost him. It cost him more than a 2-night stay in a motel. It cost him his life. See, there's a need in all of us because of the sin in our lives. We're separated from God because of our sin, which condemns us. And no matter how good we are, our good cannot outweigh our bad. And so Jesus, he saw a need. And though it would cost him, he chose to pay the price for us. And all that we need to do is accept what Jesus did, that when he offered up his life on the cross, it was enough to pay for the bad things that we do. Trust that when he died, he paid your bill. And when he rose again from the grave, it was proof that God accepted his payment on your behalf, on my behalf. But now, it's time for us to ask ourselves this question. Which of these was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And we know the answer. The answer is the one who saw a need and met it. The one who knew the price and paid it. The one who didn't talk himself out of it. Which of these loved the Lord their God with all their heart, all their soul, all their mind and strength by loving a stranger as themselves? We know it was the one who saw a need and met it. The one who saw the price and knew the price and paid it. And the one who didn't talk himself out of it. And then Jesus says to his audience, he says, to you and to me, go and do likewise. Go and be the Samaritan. Back in December of 1989, I wasn't born yet, but don't roll your eyes. I saw that. My goodness. But my family, my dad, my mom, and my 4 older siblings, they were in a really rough place. See, my dad, he had recently lost his job. They had very, very little money. 4 young kids, the youngest of which was born in July. And so they have 4 kids under the age of 5, which is just chaos. It's a young family just trying to get through living in Colorado Springs on a dew circle. And it's Christmas time. So, most families are buying presents, and they're decorating their tree, and they're decorating their house, and they're doing all these festive things. But my family, they weren't able to do any of that. In fact, my parents weren't even, they didn't really even have money for groceries or things like that to support and take care of their family, let alone Christmas decorations or Christmas presents. And they had recently started attending a church. It had been like maybe 4 months or so. And they weren't really connected. It was all really new to them. And they didn't really know people at the church. It was just kind of this like really new thing for them. And one day, around Christmas, there was a knock on the door. And my parents answer it, and it's a family from the church. And now this wasn't like a life group situation, like everybody knew the need. It wasn't like the whole church coming together to do this. It was one family, a man who he was a dentist. That is literally the only thing that I know about him. He and his family, they showed up to our house with gifts for my parents and for all the kids, with clothes for all of the kids, with shoes for all of the kids, with Christmas decorations for the house, with a Christmas tree for our family to get to enjoy. And it didn't just stop there. After they came in and they kind of helped set things up, they handed my parents $300 to go and buy groceries and whatever they needed to provide for the family. Now, this guy and his family, it wasn't their business to know about my family's financial state. It wasn't like they were seeking this out or anything. The thing is, this family saw a need and met it. And it changed the outlook that my family had on life and still has to this day. Now, I'm not saying Christmas decorations and presents are a need. Don't hear that. All the kids in here are like, see, I need that. No, don't. That's not what I'm saying. But they saw a family who had nothing. They saw a need and they chose to meet that need. And then they went above and beyond, just like the Good Samaritan did, and provided so much more than what the need was for. You see, this random act that was done by this dentist and his family back in December of 1989, it caused my parents to want to get more involved in church. Because they're like, if that's what the love of Christ looks like, I want to be a part of that. Not only that, but the following Christmas, our family, I still wasn't born yet, but my mom was 6 months pregnant with me, so I'm coming, I'm on my way. They decided to go and do Christmas at a homeless shelter to show love to people that had been shown to them the year before. It caused them to want to serve others. It placed a spark in their hearts and their lives to want to show others the love that had been shown to them. And this past week, I got a chance to talk to my parents about this because, again, I wasn't there, but I wanted to hear their version of the story. And my dad said that the way he operates the ministry that he leads, which he's been a pastor for about 20 years, the way that he operates the ministry that he leads is heavily influenced by this one family who saw a need and met it back in December of 1989. They saw a need. They didn't talk themselves out of it. saying, oh, we don't want to embarrass this family because of their financial status or anything. They saw a need and they met it. And because of what they did, it is still influencing people today, almost 33 years later. Because my parents and the ministry that they had have shown to us 5 kids, the ministry that was heavily influenced by this family, is one of the reasons that I'm in ministry today. See, the family's actions caused my parents to begin investing in the church, which then led my dad to be introduced to some people that he wouldn't have been introduced to before, which then led him to be offered a job as a maintenance man at a different church, which then, while he was the maintenance man at that church, it then led the certain and the right people to see him and to say, hey, you would be a great person to minister to 5th and 6th graders, because if you can clean up poop, you can minister to 5th and 6th graders. So I'll throw that pitch out there to you guys. But anyways, so they saw that need, and they said, he was then introduced to the right people who let him lead a 5th and 6th grade ministry called 56ers. And then while that was happening, it led him to see the right amount of people to see him, that there was a church in Haxton, Colorado that called and said, hey, you can speak. Can you come fill the pulpit for us one week? And then he came and filled the pulpit that one week, and it led those people to then say, we're going to call you to come and be our pastor in Haxton, Colorado at this small church. And while he was the pastor in Haxton, Colorado at that small church, all 5 of us kids were raised in this ministry that was heavily influenced by one family doing something where they simply met a need that they saw. So I'm not going to say that if this family hadn't done that, I wouldn't be here in ministry today. God has a way of working things out in his plan. But I will say that when that family chose to meet that need, they weren't thinking about how it was going to affect my family 33 years later. They weren't thinking about how it could possibly change the trajectory of an entire family, but it did. They had no idea what was hanging in the balance of their response to seeing a need and choosing to meet it. And here's the thing. This is what I want you to get and what I want you to understand. You have no idea what hangs in the balance of your response when you see a need that you could meet. See, this family who I don't even know, they made such a huge impact on my life. They saw a need and they met it. So this family is one of my heroes. They went and did likewise, like what God said. I don't know that I would be here otherwise. Not physically. I mean, maybe my parents, they were so filled with joy whenever they thought of this great thing that it put them in the mood or something, and bam, that's why I was there. I don't know. Maybe that's what it is. But I'm meaning here in ministry. I don't know if I would be in ministry today had that family not seen a need and chose to do what Jesus said and to love the Lord their God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength by loving a stranger as themselves. So Crossing, when you see a need, meet it. When you see a price, pay it. If there's a need that you can meet it. Go and do the same. Be the Samaritan. Crossing, like I said at the beginning, Jesus made hero status available to each and every one of us because the hero is the one who sees the need and meets it. And you have no idea the impact that you can make with the love of Jesus Christ by meeting the need of one person and the impact that can have on the rest of their life, on the rest of their family's life, and for generations to come. Because now, I have a 7-month-old daughter that I pray as I'm continuing in ministry and she's growing up, that I live my life in a way that's still impacted by that family who made a decision before I was even born that the way I live my life, she will be impacted by that family. Crossing, we have the opportunity to make that same impact in the world today. So when you see a need, meet it. When you know a price, pay it. And let's shine the light of Christ and the love of Christ to this world. Dear God, I just thank you so much that you love us, even though we don't deserve it, God. You love us, and you loved us enough to offer up your Son in our place. You saw the need, and you paid the price. And we thank you so much for that, God. I pray that you would open our eyes to see the needs around us. God, that you would give us the strength and the courage to step out and to meet those needs, to take the love that you show us each and every day and share that with others in a world that so desperately needs your love, God. Help us to be the Samaritan, to be the one who steps into that role and carries your light with us in everything that we do, God. We thank you again so much for loving us. Just be with us this week, God, and help us to truly just shine your light in this world. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.